Okay.
Yeah, that's weird. So in Zoom's documentation, it says when the person who created the meeting comes on, it should automatically make me the host and make you the co-host. But it didn't do that. But anyways, guys,
Okay, here we are.
We're here. This is the 90-day language challenge live stream. This is the 13th weekly live stream that we've done as part of the September 90-day language challenge. If you guys missed some other ones we did in the past, we had live streams about goal setting. We had some very successful LingQ users come on and explain their personal approach to using LingQ. So some people that won the challenge in June. And then we had live streams about how to read ebooks on LingQ and find ebooks across the web, and how to use YouTube videos and Netflix for language learning on LingQ. So if you're interested in that stuff, go check out those live streams. And yeah, today we have Steve coming on here. So hello, Steve.
Hello. Excuse me while I get set up here. I just closed the door so you don't get outside noises in here.
No problem. Yeah, so we are live on Facebook and YouTube. So I'm going to be monitoring the chat on Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube. So if you guys have any questions for Steve throughout the chat or throughout the session, just write it in there, and I will take a look, and then I will ask Steve live. So so for those of you who may not be familiar with the 90-day language challenge, we have two different challenges. We have a regular 90-day challenge, and we have a hardcore challenge. For the regular challenge, it's pretty simple. You just have to meet one target. That's a coins target, and you get coins by creating links, by reading and listening to lessons on LingQ, and by moving links from a link to known. So that's how you do it. And then for the hardcore challenge, it's a bit more complex. You have 5 different targets you have to hit. So you have to hit a reading target, you have to hit a listening target, you have to hit a links created target, and a links learned target. So that's a bit more complex. And one more thing I want to mention before we get underway with questions. So the last few live streams, what we've done is do a conversation meetup. So we met up here on Zoom, and then we broke off into small groups based on our target language, and we just practiced speaking. So after 2 months or so of a challenge, we figured it was a good time to practice speaking. Once we got a lot of reading and listening in our target language, then it might be time to start speaking. So we have some more conversation meetup events, a couple for all languages you can join, and then also some for specific languages. So I just shared a spreadsheet in the Zoom chat, which you guys can see, with information on the upcoming conversation meetups. So if you see one for your language, mark it in your calendar and join. And then there's the all language meetups, which anyone can join. Just click the registration link there and register. And if you want to get more conversation practice for a language that we don't have a meetup scheduled for, you can reach out to me, and we're looking for volunteers to hold those meetups. So if you really want conversation practice, that is an option. We also have tutors on LingQ, kind of similar to italki. I know a lot of people have probably used italki. The advantage to getting a tutor on LingQ is that the tutors on LingQ are familiar with the LingQ approach to language learning. So they can help you find lessons on LingQ. A lot of them created their own lessons on LingQ. So that is another good option if you want some conversation practice. So let's get to it now. let's talk about the 90-day challenge. So Steve, obviously the LingQ approach to learning a language is all about input, comprehensible input, and the 90-day challenge also is all about input. So can you explain the value of input-based activities for language learning to people who may not be familiar with this approach?
Let's say that traditional language learning puts a lot of emphasis on output, on speaking correctly, on knowing the rules. And it's my feeling that that is putting the cart before the horse. Okay. That before we all want to speak, and we want to speak as correctly as possible without being paranoid about making mistakes, but we do want to speak as correctly as we can. In order to be able to speak correctly, you need a number of things. The brain has to get used to the language. Even if you explain the rules of the language, if the brain isn't accustomed to the language, if the brain hasn't been given an opportunity to create new neural networks, just explaining the rules is not going to do it. Mm-hmm. So you can look at rules. It might help you notice certain things in the language, but the main thing is, in terms of learning a language, is to expose your brain, your mind, to as much of the language as possible. The structures of the language, the sounds of the language, the words of the language. And this is done through input, because obviously you don't have the language within you. And but of course, we all want to get to output. And you mentioned italki, which is a website that I use. I'm using it now for Arabic. For Persian, I have a tutor at LingQ. And ultimately, without telling any secrets, we want to improve our interface for the whole tutoring function at LingQ, because it is important to speak. But the way you're going to improve your ability to speak is to acquire more words, to improve your comprehension, to become familiar with the language. And that's why we put so much of an emphasis on input at LingQ. But certainly we don't discount the value of speaking, but you can't begin by speaking, and you can't begin by speaking correctly. You have to begin by getting the language in you and letting your brain, to a large extent, develop patterns that enable then the brain to manage that new language for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like, if you listen to a song in a different language, and then you try to immediately sing that song, you're not even going to get close. But if you slow down and then hear the song a lot of times, then when you maybe do try to sing it, because you've heard it a lot and you've allowed your brain to create those connections, then you'll have a better chance at actually singing the right words.
I mean, I think that's a good example. Personally, I don't use songs a lot, but I mean, it's all we learn from content that is of interest to us. Mm-hmm. But what is true of songs is true of, let's say, our mini stories. Your typical song repeats a lot of the same words. First of all, songs typically deal with love and whatever, all this kind of stuff. So you get the same, my heart, my feelings, my love, all this stuff, which is fine. So limited vocabulary, repeated often. And very often there will be a sort of refrain that repeats and repeats and repeats. And particularly in the early stages of learning a language, it's good to have a lot of repetition. And I've often mentioned in my YouTube videos the power of the mini stories, which each story repeats essentially the same vocabulary 5 times. And if I look at my statistics in any language that I've studied, the number of times that I've listened to each story ends up being 30, 40 times. Mm-hmm. Because I listen to the same story 10 times in a row. It's because I listen to story 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and then I go back to 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. But it ends up in the end, and very often I scramble my playlist, but I end up listening to them very often. So you need a lot of repetition. So that's a great input strategy at the beginning. However, and I think one of the real strengths of LingQ is, comes a point where, and I mention this often because I think it's a wonderful statement by this German neuroscientist, the brain requires repetition and novelty. You can't keep pounding the same stuff into the brain. The brain finds it less and less interesting every time. So the repetition is good, and it's good to vary the repetition so you're not sitting there in one shot listening to the same story 10 times. That's not doing you much good. But if you go to 10 and back to 1, but then at a certain point you don't want to listen to these relatively, say, mundane stories. You want to get to what interests you. And so at that point, it could be songs. If you have a favorite artist in the language you're learning, it could be a YouTube video. It could be a YouTube video of a song. All of these can be imported into LingQ. It could be a Netflix movie. It could be an article in a newspaper. And I think we have, through our browser extensions, we offer the opportunity to the learner who has gone from sort of the beginner material, and not just the mini stories, because there's lots of beginner material in the different languages, and one should vary this content, again, to keep it interesting. But then at a certain point, you want to get into authentic material. And of course, LingQ helps you do that because of all the functionality that's there to help you get through these more difficult content items. But the strategy is one of getting the language in you, exposing yourself to the language. And then at some point, as you said in your introduction, we want to speak. We want to speak. We want to test out what we've acquired. And at first it's difficult. But we find that if we can understand what the other person is saying, pretty soon we start being able to speak.
Absolutely. Yeah, I guess what made me think of songs is, well, I've been listening to songs in Spanish for a while. But before I was introduced to the LingQ approach, I would kind of rush into trying to imitate the song. But now, having been exposed to the input-based approach, I'm just listening to the same songs, but instead of singing it, I'm just listening to it more. And then now I find I'm actually hearing the words better.
It's an interesting thing. First of all, if you listen to a song and you listen to phrases in a song, just as when you hear phrases in many stories at LingQ, these phrases, you start to absorb them as phrases, and then you're able to use these phrases. And if you have phrases that have become a part of you, then you tend to use the words correctly, because typically in every language, certain words are used with certain other words. They fit together. That's how people use the language. And so if you get these phrases going for you, it makes your language more natural. So, but the other thing I was going to say, you make an interesting point. So you try to sing the song right away, it's difficult. If you just listen to the song, they've done experiment, and I'm not sure how this applies, but there's a thing called, and we're going to have someone listening who's an actual cognitive science specialist, and going to tell me that I'm, don't know what I'm talking about. But there are things called mirror neurons.
Mirror neurons, I've heard of these, yeah.
And they find, for example, that if we hear someone playing a piece, on the piano, the portion of our brain that's activated is the same as the portion that's activated if we play the piano. Now, does that apply to language learning? I don't know, but I use that as an example of how just plain listening and reading, and they're different in how the words and the meaning is received by the brain, but it does build up your capability to speak. It doesn't mean you don't have to speak at some point, and you have to practice speaking, but the listening and the reading are very powerful in terms of building up your capability to speak. And the reason, therefore, I emphasize that, and I sometimes refer to Stephen Krashen, is because traditionally we learn in a classroom. The teacher tries to get us to say something. We're given a test. She teaches, or he teaches some conjugation, and then we're tested on it right away. And then we get marked down. We got 6 out of 10, and there's no way you're going to get it right away. You're not going to get it right away.
Right.
So so I think that very often people, and in classroom situations, we're a bit impatient in terms of what. And language learning is not a place where you want to be impatient.
Yeah. So Steve mentioned mini stories before, and for those who may not be aware, all of the languages that we have on LingQ have a set of mini stories, some 60 stories in each language that they're basic stories that have a lot of repetition in it. So as Steve said, they're really good, especially for beginners, to hammer in some repetitive patterns that will come up again and again in a language. And as a beginner, you want to expose yourself to those to build a solid base for getting into other content. And really, that's what makes LingQ great, is that you can import content from around the web. And we're especially in our LingQ 5.0 update coming out. We've put in a lot of work on improving the feed to instead of you having to find content yourself, we'll give you content in a neat, very clean interface with different categories. It'll almost look like a Netflix scroll, but you'll still be able to import content from around the web. So, all right, let's check out our questions here. All right, we got a question from Misty. Hi, Steve. On one of your chats, you said you don't review your links much. What do you use the links for then?
It's very important to have a sense that you're progressing. Because initially we get the sense that when you say we go from knowing nothing, understanding nothing, being able to say nothing, to where we understand something and we can say something. So there's that initial sense of achievement. But then we go through a long period where we're slowly acquiring words, but we don't really feel we're improving. For me, one of my major, landmarks or indicators that I'm improving is the color of my lesson page. So fewer blue words, more yellow words, and ultimately more white words. So to me, it's an indicator. Also, if I look up a blue word, it's an unknown word. If I look it up, I get a meaning, which helps me get through whatever story I'm doing. It doesn't mean I've learned the word. It doesn't mean I even remember that I've seen the word before. So the next time I see that word, it's now yellow. Okay, I've seen this word before. I still don't know what it means, but I've seen it before. Otherwise, I wouldn't even know that I've seen it before. I then go through, and one of the things I do, I don't go through flashcards per se, but I will go through the vocabulary list, which is available. And I'll go through some of the words that I've studied as a list, and I'll move some of them along. So if they're status 1, like I just met them, and I kind of feel I know them a little better than that, I'll move them to status 2. Or eventually I'll move them to status 3. Some of them I'll move to known. But then, because typically I tend to accumulate a lot of yellow words because I'm constantly grinding new content, and a lot of these yellow words, you'll find that you'll be saving more and more low frequency words, because when you start into it, you're going to save words that are high frequency, and pretty soon you'll see them enough that you'll have learned them. But after a while, you accumulate thousands, and in my case, tens of thousands of words that don't appear often enough that I kind of easily learn them. And yet I have now learned them because I've seen them enough. So what I tend to do is I'll go to my list and I'll move them to say category 3. Then I can go to my vocabulary list and I can select only status 3 words, because the words that I'm most likely to be able to manually move to known are the status 3 words. And I'll also move them along while I'm reading. So if I'm reading and I come across a word that I looked up before and it's a status 1 word, I've seen it before, I don't really know the word, but I'm a little better, more comfortable with it, I'll move it to status 2 and eventually to status 3. So eventually I'll collect a bunch of words in my status 3 category. And so then I can sort for that, just select a list of only status 3 words, and then I'll go through them and I'll move them to known. So that gives me a big bump in my known words total. And the known words total is also another indicator that you're progressing in the language. So if I've got 20,000 sort of saved links and only 6,000 known words, I'm kind of out of balance. So I'm saying to myself, I should go into those 20,000, saved links, move what I can up to 3, and then go after my status 3 words and move them to known. And I will find lots that are known. And all of a sudden I'll go from 6,000 to 7,000. So those are some of the ways. I'm not a big flashcarder because, it's good to do. It depends on how much time you have. But I find that they're more time consuming. But I will review lists when I turn a page, if I'm reading, for example, and I do most of my work on the iPad. I will review a list of words in a story, particularly if I'm reviewing this lesson for the second or third or fourth time, and there's still lots of yellow words. I'll go into that list and see what I have there, and maybe move some of them along. So that's just some indication of, and I should point out in that regard that even the mini stories have words that you still don't know. Even if you're further along, there's words in the mini stories that I don't know, that I've looked up, but I don't remember. And I go back to the mini stories because they're not just for beginners. Mini stories, I consider that it's like going to the gym. Okay. If I want to freshen up because I got an interview in Spanish, or I got an interview in Russian, one of the best places to go to exercise your muscles, to go over stuff, basic structures, basic verbs, is the mini story. So I go there all
Fundamentals.
the time. Fundamentals. You go back to fundamentals. It's your core exercises. This is where you work on, because no matter how good we are in the language, some of the most basic things in the language still escape us, aren't yet kind of natural to us. And they can become natural, and then through disuse, they're no longer natural. And so you got to go back. And the mini stories is where you go. It's a comfortable place to go. You're now not listening for meaning. You're listening for some of these structures that have slipped away, or that you're not, fully in control of. And when I do that, I tend to review. Like sometimes I'll go in, and if there's 6 or 7 yellow words in a story, rather than reading through the whole story, I'll just do those 7 words. So I can quickly review. I might listen to the story once, because the story typically goes, there's 3, right? There's he, and then I, and then question. So I might just listen to it once, go through the yellow words to remind myself of some of these words that are still not totally, in my possession. So those are some of the ways that I use the links.
So you can learn links without doing the flashcards, but
yeah, but to each his own or her own. I must say I enjoy doing the flashcards sometimes. It's just that, again, when I was learning Chinese 50 years ago, it was a full-time job, and I would certainly have done the flashcards. But now I'm down here in Palm Springs. My wife likes to play golf every day. We're with friends. I don't have that much time. Plus, I'm trying to do Persian and Arabic. So I skip the flashcards. But it depends on the situation.
Thank you for your question, Misty. All right, we got a question from Don Ricky on YouTube. What about the theory that you should not speak for a whole year in a language, such as Thai, but rather do input only?
I have heard that. I know there's a school in Thailand that operates on that basis. First of all, I don't believe you should have any kind of hard and fast rule when it comes to language. Because language learning is a personal journey of discovery. It's up to you. That's the first thing. So it may be that this is effective. I doubt it, but it's possible. Second of all, you should do what you like to do. So if you want to speak, and I'm trying to picture myself, if I lived in Thailand and I went to this school and I'm not allowed to speak Thai for a year, I think I would rebel.
Yeah.
Don't think.
At least say hi to your neighbors,
Just not possible.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the theory behind that is. There's all kinds of theories out there. And that's why I think the important thing is to do what you like to do. And certainly, you don't want to neglect input and think you can just talk your way through to fluency. You won't. You can speak in order to trigger some conversation from the other side, and then you'll be learning from that input. But you need the input. But I don't think it matters when you start speaking.
Yeah, I mean, I know personally, especially if I'm in another country, I like to speak at least what I know. But I think what you're saying is you don't want the speaking. You don't want to put the cart before the horse. So you don't want the speaking to get in the way of the input activities, which are gonna build the base better for later down the road.
You don't want to neglect the input. Even if you started speaking, it doesn't matter. Speak if you feel like speaking. But without comprehension, who are you going to speak to? What's your conversation going to be? Hello, hello, how are you? It's raining today.
Where are you from? What do you do? That's it.
That's it. So
great. All right, another question from Toy. Toy. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but hello. My daily goal has been starting over at 8 Eastern time. I guess this is a technical question. Today it started at 7 and I finished my daily target goal a little after 7, which means I lost my streak. Any idea on why this happened? Today it started at 7 and I finished my daily. Today I finished, my daily goal started at 7 and I finished my daily target a little after 7, which means I lost my streak. Tui, let's reach out to support if something is happening there. Please reach out to support@link.com and they'll be able to help you there. All right, a question from Guts. I use LingQ for Russian without prior knowledge. Now I am plateauing, unable to comprehend TV news except some Chamovsky articles, perhaps. Should I go back to the basics and practice beginner stuff? I did French at school with all the basics and used LingQ for refresher. It worked really well, helping me to read books. So yeah, I mean, it sounds like his comprehension is slipping and he wants to know if he should go back and study the basics.
I think that it's always useful to have a combination of relatively simple material. I use the example of the mini stories, but there are lots of other similar sort of, call it beginner material, because it builds up your fluency, it builds up your comprehension, a more limited range of vocabulary. But at the same time, you should press forward. So the kind of material that you would like to listen to, either we have some of that in our library, I think, or you find some of that on the web, newspaper articles, YouTube material, bring it in to LingQ. If you listen, you don't understand, then you can read. And as you read, you look up words, you have a chance of understanding. But let me assure you that having gone through this with Russian, with Czech, with Greek, with right now Persian and Arabic, it takes a long time to understand sort of authentic material intended for the native speaker. Even when you have only 15% unknown words, it's just, and I've been there so often. I ask myself, will I ever get to where I can comfortably understand this material? And eventually you do. And you just have to continue listening, reading. In other words, listen to material where you can get at the text, or you can look it up, let's say on LingQ, because typically it's your lack of words and your lack of familiarity with listening that is preventing you from understanding, not lack of grammar knowledge. You can always look up stuff. And once we've had a lot of exposure to the language, we realize that there's not that much there in the grammar. It's not endless. The words we need almost seem endless, but the grammar structures we need, they're not endless, but they're a little bit difficult for us. They don't exist in our language. They're difficult for us to get used to. And the only way we get used to them is being exposed to them over and over and over again, occasionally looking up some description of how the language works, feeling a little better when we look up the description, and then going back to listening and still struggling. And it just takes a long time. So my suggestion is, yes, go back, and I do this myself, go back to some of the simpler stuff, like the mini stories, but don't deny yourself. Don't just stay there, because then you'll never get out of that. You have to continue pushing yourself into authentic material, finding stuff of interest. And that's another big thing. If you are interested in the content, even familiar with the content, you're going to understand it much better. If you're listening to something that's of no interest to you, the brain just gets turned off. So find stuff of interest, find stuff where you like the voice. That's also important. And all of that helps speed you along to where you can understand better and better.
Yeah, there's a course in Spanish on LingQ called Radialistas, and there's one of the voice actors, a very deep voice. I really love listening to it. All right, we got another question from Julia. Hi, Steve. I cannot believe I see you in a live stream. My question, which is more important, memorizing vocabulary words and phrases I learned every day, or just keep reading and listening to new articles and listen to more new vocabulary words and phrases, but have no time to really memorize them?
See, I'm not convinced that if we're talking about what's efficient, I think it's hard to memorize vocabulary. Like, how many vocabulary items are you going to memorize? Even in Persian, I think in Persian, I must have 20,000 saved words. But I can't possibly memorize 20,000 words. There's no way. So I don't think, and yet, as I described earlier, when I go through my list of status 3 words, I find a lot of them that I already know because I've seen them so often. And so I didn't deliberately memorize them. And so I definitely believe that a strategy based on using LingQ, moving words along to status 3 and eventually to known. And if you find that you no longer know the word, you move it back to status 3 or status 2. It doesn't matter. It's not like you're never ever going to forget something you've learned. You continue to forget and you relearn, and all of which is good. We know, again, from cognitive research, that anytime we learn something and we then forget it and we relearn it, we know it better. So there's nothing wrong with forgetting stuff that we have learned. And even if you were to memorize a list of words, assuming you could memorize 20,000 words, you're going to forget them anyway. And you'll have to relearn them. And you won't relearn them by memorizing them again. You'll relearn them because you come across them. So I personally am not a big fan of memorization, but there are people who have memory, methods and stuff like that. So that's fine. But it's not something I do.
Yeah, and it seems when we come across a new word or a word that we've only seen a couple times, but we don't know it in a story, our brain really likes that because it has context and it fits within the story, so it has meaning. But when you're just reviewing a flashcard by itself outside of any story or context, it's a lot harder to stick. Absolutely.
And what's more, as we see that word in different contexts, we get a better sense of the scope of meaning of that word. Because there are nuances to that meaning. Any word, a lot of words that we think of will have a slightly different, connotation in different situations, in different contexts. So we get a fuller and fuller sense of what that word means, scope of meaning, how it's used. So to just memorize a list of words, I think would be difficult.
Not the best use of your time.
I don't think so, but
yeah,
whatever people like to do, the main thing is to stay with the program.
All right, we got another question from Toy. Hi, Steve. Thanks for the opportunity. What do you consider knowing a word? When you can read it and understand it?
So here again, I mean, we can argue, and you can have lots of different definitions of knowing a word. I think some people feel that until you can use the word, you can't claim to know the word. So, and it's not an important point. Like I can't go out there and brag that I know so many words in language X. So what I tend to do is, if I kind of feel I know this word in this context, I'll move it to know. I can always move it back again.
Right.
So I tend to move my words along. If I understand the word in this particular context, I'll move it to know. It beefs up my statistics, makes me feel good. And if I come across it again and I don't know what it means, I move it back. And the objective ultimately is not to claim that I know 30 or 40,000 words. The objective is to get to where, I download, I get a new lesson in Persian and it's got 15% new words. There's lots of white on the page. There's a little bit of yellow, and I'm reading through it and I'm understanding a lot of it, except of course the words that I have to look up. So I know I'm better now than I was 6 months earlier. And not because statistics tell me I know X number of words. It's because my page is wider. I understand more of it. And so there's this gradual process of understanding more and more of the language. All of that is more important than worrying about the definition of knowing a word. It's like this other thing. Should we really be treating every form of a word as a different word, the way our statistics do at LingQ? Because that's the only thing we're able to measure.
Right.
Sure, whatever you want to do. Like some people say you should talk in terms of word families. But word family is also a difficult concept. What do you mean? Like, say act, actor, react, action. Is that the same for word family? I don't know. So it doesn't matter. So we treat them as the separate forms of the word are counted as individual words in our system, and move it to known when you feel like it. No one's, you can test yourself. We have those closed tests. You can test yourself in the flashcards to see if you really do know the word. But I don't worry about it.
Yeah. I do the same thing you do. As soon as I understand the word in the context, I move it to known. I know someone that was on another live stream said that he, for verbs, for instance, he will, if he understands it, he will move it to for, and he won't move it to known until he understands what the tense is, what the person is, that sort of thing. But again, it sounds like
that's a personal thing, and if that person enjoys doing that, then that works for them.
Right.
And so no one can tell them that that's not a good thing, a good thing to do.
Yep. Okay, a question from Oliver. Hi, Steve. I have a question. Have you ever tried to learn a language with zero motivation? Did you stop learning that language, or what happened?
The biggest motivation killer is a lack of good content to listen or read. Listen to or read. And so I was initially turned off Korean because 5-6 years ago, there wasn't content more or less at my level of interest to me. And the beginner material, of which there is a ton in Korean, was quite uninteresting. The voices were boring. And we didn't have the range of material that we now have at LingQ. We didn't have the mini stories. We didn't have the ability to import YouTube videos. So I left Korean and went on to Russian because I found I couldn't find stuff of interest. Now, I haven't gone back to Korean because I'm on to Persian and Arabic. So to me, that's the biggest motivation killer. There has to be something there of interest. There has to be something motivating you. It's either, maybe your grandparents speak the language, or you've got a partner who speaks the language, or you want to visit the country, or you're interested in history, or it's anime, or it's K-pop. There has to be something there of interest. Unless you're just, why are you learning the language? There has to be something that's pushing you in that direction.
Okay, a question from Mustafa on Facebook. With the rapid development of technology, do you think that we need to learn languages when there are small devices and phone apps that interpret everything we want to say to others and anything they want to say to us? Don't you think that language teachers will be either jobless or delivering pizza?
I get this all the time. It's my belief that more and more people are going to learn languages because it's becoming easier and easier to do. The technology that we use, the internet, MP3 technology, even artificial intelligence. Like I will download, say, I'll get an MP3 file in Persian or Arabic from YouTube, and I'll post it to this site called Happy Scribe, and they produce a transcript for me. Now I've got something that I can import into LingQ. I've got the MP3 file and I got a transcript. That's technology. MP3 file I can carry in my iPhone, more language learning material in more languages than you would have found in a university language lab 20 years ago. A language lab that they would be out trying to raise money from the community because they want to spend $50,000 on a language lab. I've got that in my iPhone, portable. All of this stuff is making it easier and easier to learn languages. Now, when I went to Vietnam, I tried to learn Vietnamese in 2 weeks. It's impossible. You can't. I learned a few phrases. I couldn't even use those phrases. Like it's remarkably difficult to just learn a few phrases and expect to be able to use them. So I had my iPhone, and I would speak into my iPhone in English. It converted that to Vietnamese. I would show it to the Vietnamese person. He would read it. I think it could even recognize Vietnamese, and I can't remember. But it was a way of communicating. But that's not really communicating.
Right.
That's not communicating. That's very limited. Where's the train station? Okay, you absolutely need to say something. Where's the train station? But if I'm sitting in a restaurant and there's a family beside me of Vietnamese people and I want to join them in a conversation, I'm not going to do that with myself. So, and multiply that by all the different languages and all the situations I've been in where I've had wonderful, warm, contact with people because I speak the language. You wouldn't do that if you're struggling with your iPhone. And not to mention the fact that again, I refer to my most recent experience with Arabic and Persian, just getting to know more about those cultures and the history and so forth. And now I want to go and visit those countries. And I have visited, Russia and Ukraine and Romania and Greece. And you don't do that with the cell phone. So the quick answer is no. I think that what is happening is that the world of language learning is changing, and language teachers should be less sort of a source of everything you need to know about the language. Like, I'm the teacher, I'm going to teach you the language. That's not necessary, because there's so much available on the internet in terms of language content. You want to download a PDF grammar of Romanian, there it is, free of charge. You got the grammar. You can find tutors on italki. So the teacher has to be a motivator, has to be able to explain how to use what's on the internet, and to fill in the blanks, answer questions, and think of activities but the whole paradigm of language teaching, I believe, has to change. And as I said, stop putting the cart before the horse. Get the comprehension, get the language into people, then worry about getting them to speak, and hopefully eventually speak correctly.
Yeah, I think if you think that learning a language is only, the purpose of it is only to convey information like a robot, then fine, Google Translate. But to really connect with people, I mean, learning someone's language, you're going to connect with them on a much deeper level. And I mean, when people that speak different languages, it's almost like they're living in different worlds. Because there are concepts in some languages that just don't exist in other languages. Like you said, you went to Vietnam. I spent 3 years in Vietnam, and an interesting thing about the Vietnamese language, they very rarely use the pronouns you and I. When they refer to familiar people, they use relational pronouns. So it's a different way of looking at the world, and relating to people that you just don't get through Google Translate.
Plus, when you learn another language, you are participating in another culture.
Right.
There's something about it that is almost not real. You leave the sort of real world of your own language, and you're play acting in this other world and exploring this other world. You can't do that with a device. You have to do that through learning the language. So I don't see that as a risk. I think language learning is going to pick up speed.
Awesome. All right. We got a question from James. Hello, everyone. Thank you for holding these meetings. I've been learning Japanese for almost 18 months now and speaking for about 2 months. But recently there have been times where I felt like my abilities have noticeably dropped. I kept pushing through, and eventually those feelings went away, but it hit my motivation at the same time. Have you experienced this before? And if so, do you have any advice or insight about this?
I had an interview with a lady from Brazil who has a blog, and she's into learning languages, and she's belonged to AJ Hogue, who's a person I respect a lot, his group of effortless English and stuff. And we had our conversation in English, and I could tell, look, this way, she spoke so well, so effortlessly. I wouldn't say her pronunciation was native-like, but her use of the language was perfect. And yet I know that she's under pressure. She feels that she's not doing as well as in fact she's doing. And I know that's often the case. We, in speaking another language, we're afraid to make mistakes. We're conscious that, it's not so comfortable. It's so much easier to speak your own language. I mean, it's like the easiest thing to do is to speak your own language. And I think sometimes we are probably, it's James, right?
Yeah.
Probably when James feels he's not doing as well, he's probably doing just as well. But he's more tired, or for some other reason, he's a little more critical of himself. Every time you use the language, every time you listen in the language, you are improving. That's how our brains work. The more experience we have with a certain set of situations, slowly the brain starts to form more and more patterns to deal with that. So there's no way you can keep speaking and get worse. That's not going to happen. You may not be improving as fast as you would like. So it's a matter of your own expectations or the demands that you make on yourself. And it is possible that if you're more tired, it can also depend on who you're talking to. Like, we know that there are certain people who there's very positive vibes, resonance, and we're comfortable. And so we do better, we speak better. And there are other people who make us a little bit on edge, and so we don't do as well. So all of these different factors can influence it. But there's no way you can continue to listen and read and speak and get worse. You will only get better. Your expectations may get higher all the time, but you are not going to be getting worse. I don't believe that.
Yeah, there's a concept in psychology called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and basically when you start learning something, as you get into it and as you're picking up knowledge, you realize how much more there is to learn. So you feel stupider, even though you're getting better, just because you realize that, you know, your mind opens and you realize I still have so much more to learn.
Socrates, I know that I know nothing.
Mm-hmm. All right, a question from Joseph on YouTube. Steve, when you import a Netflix show into LingQ, do you like to go through the lesson quickly to create new links and listen and read to it after, or do you listen and read straight away and create links as you go?
Okay.
I guess this would apply to any video
I
transcript too.
Netflix much. I was using it when I was working on my Turkish. The problem is that if you get an Arabic movie on Netflix, the dialogue isn't, say, Egyptian Arabic, but they don't provide you with Egyptian Arabic subtitles. So you get standard Arabic subtitles, which is kind of useless. So it doesn't work for Egyptian. Similarly, Persian, I haven't found any Persian movies on Netflix. But so right now I'm off that. But when I was doing it with Turkish, I would import the dialogue, and I would go through the dialogue, gaining words. And then for a while I would sit at my computer and maybe watch the movie and read the subtitles, which it's easier to do in Turkish because it's a Latin alphabet. So it's much easier. I can read much more quickly, obviously, in the Latin alphabet, which I'm very used to, compared to the Arabic alphabet, which I'm not so used to. So for all of these reasons, my strategy with Turkish, when I was doing Turkish, was get out the text, do it in LingQ, watch it even on television. But on television, I can't control the frames. If I watch it on a computer, I can actually stop it and read it a second time. So I did more of. Then I'd go back and watch the movie. Say my wife and I were both watching it on TV. So it was kind of a mixture of all of these different things.
All righty. All right. So another question from Alexander, also a fan of using LingQ as an indicator tracking progress, but also choosing lessons or gauging difficulty for content. I'm considering consuming based on the new word percentage.
Right. I do that. Okay. I think that's a very useful function. I would say beyond 20% new words, it's going to be very tough going. If it's only 5% new words, given that the system considers names as new words, that's probably too easy. So I've always found that 10 to 15% new words works for me. Now, other people may have different sweet spots, or where they like to be. But that's a very good indicator of what to get.
Awesome. All right, a question from Doa. I have a problem in American accent, especially schwa sounds. I guess that this would apply to Canadian accent too. I know British accent as my background was British. Is it normal to mix British with North American accent while speaking?
Okay. I would think that a majority of people who speak English as a second language or any other language as a second language end up with an accent that is a combination of their own language and plus what they've been listening to, which could be a combination, in the case of English, could be a combination of American and British English. Or in the case of Spanish, it could be a combination of Mexican and Spanish and Argentinian.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a good strategy to listen to a lot of different varieties. So if you're learning English, I would listen to American English. I would listen to Australian, Scottish. Those are kind of the outliers, most difficult to understand, maybe. A variety of accents in terms of American accents, Boston and, Texas or whatever. Get used to hearing different accents. Same in Portuguese, same in French, Quebecois French. And then ultimately, in terms of when you go to speak, you may find that a certain accent is most useful for you because you live in the UK or you live in the US or you live in Australia. And so you need to speak with an accent that is most useful, most prestigious, most comfortable in that environment. At that time, you can then focus in on, say, content that is just in that accent, or Spanish from Spain versus Mexico or Colombia. But in terms of your listening activities, when you're learning the language and acquiring words, developing comprehension, I think it's a good strategy to listen to a variety of different types in the language. And when you're focusing in on the form of the pronunciation or the accent that you're going to use, then you can set yourself the goal. Here's the person I want to imitate. Typically a person whose voice you like, intonation you like, the accent you like, and you listen to a lot of that. That becomes your sort of music. That's the song that Tommy was referring to. And you can do a lot of listening to that in order to slowly develop that intonation and that sort of rhythm in your language.
Yep. So definitely normal to mix accents, not a problem. And if you want to focus on a particular accent, listen to content in that accent. Awesome. Thank you, Steve. And thank you, Doa, for your question. All right. So we got another question on YouTube. Gozdi asks, what is the best way to learn Korean? Steve, I know you said you were learning Korean. Did you ever pick it back up?
So I haven't, I still have, I have lots of words in Korean. I went at it for a long time. I have, according to Link, I don't know, 50,000 known words. I eventually was able to find content, podcasts of interest, which I had to pay someone to transcribe. Now I could use Happy Scribe, automatic transcription, which is an awful lot cheaper than paying someone to transcribe. I now have the mini stories. So, but I have any number of languages that I would like to work on and improve. Greek, Romanian, Czech, you name it, Korean. But right now I'm kind of focused on Arabic and Persian. And even there, I've moved from standard Arabic to Egyptian Arabic. So there's a limit to how many different things you can be doing. Mm-hmm. I am interested in Korean. I would definitely find stuff on YouTube. Again, Korean is the writing system is, for me, easier than Arabic and Persian because it's like a one-to-one. The symbols relate directly to the pronunciation, which Arabic and Persian is kind of like English in that regard, that sometimes you can't really tell how something is pronounced. Mm-hmm. So I would do all of those things. I would sort of mix the mini stories with, let's say, movies on Netflix. And of course, there's so many Korean titles available at Netflix that I would combine some, working on those texts with just sitting down with my wife and enjoying something on TV with English subtitles, for that matter, and then picking up what I pick up. So it's something that I might get back to, but right now it's just not number one on my list of things to do.
Okay. So Steve, my 90-day challenge is coming to an end here, and one of my goals for learning Spanish is to be able to read Borges in Spanish. I read a story by him in college in English, and I loved it. So I want to read it in Spanish. And at the beginning of my challenge in September, I tried to read it, and it was just way too difficult. So now, toward the end of the challenge this weekend, I'm gonna try to read it again and see how it goes. I know just looking at it, I have a lot more white words on the page. So is this a good way to gauge progress?
Oh yeah. Have you been reading it in LingQ?
Well, I tried at first. I'm going to read it in LingQ. I tried in September, and it was just far too difficult. But today took a peek at the lesson again, and I think it's doable now.
So this is a lesson in LingQ with audio?
No,
Oh,
but
okay.
I can import audio into it.
Yeah, I mean, I found that typically I would import ebooks,
Mm-hmm.
and then I would treat the audio separately because it's just too much trouble. You could theoretically go to Audacity, cut it up into, sound files that you would
Right.
up to, but it's just too much work. So I would just listen to the audiobook. But listening to audiobooks and then reading those books is a wonderful way to acquire a language. I've done it in a number of languages. And get an ebook, import the ebook into LingQ, and where I know that an audiobook is available. And so obviously if it's 19th century, the text is free. If it's not 19th century, you got to buy the book. You have to make sure that it's something that's importable into LingQ. But if you have a good book and a good ebook combination and you spend $20 on each, you're going to be busy with that book for like 2-3 months. I mean, that's a good investment. And you're going to be out jogging, or you're going to be in your car and you're going to be listening to this, and you're going to be transported into wherever it is. And it's a wonderful way to learn languages. I've done it many times, and you do improve. I think the big thing is not to have unreasonable expectations. Language learning takes time.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. All right. Well, we're at the top of the hour. We have one more question from James Jones on Zoom. When I was learning Spanish, I had this aha moment when suddenly I was able to understand and speak. I haven't experienced this yet in Portuguese or French, in which I'm at an intermediate level. Have you experienced this, Steve? So when that aha moment comes?
I think there are aha moments, more than one, where you say, wow, look at me. I understood that. I didn't understand 6 months ago. And then you go back into the fact that there's, as you said, there's always so much more to learn. There's always so many words, so many more words that you need. I would also say that for someone who has, achieved a high level in Spanish, Portuguese and French, in a way, are low-hanging fruit because so much of the vocabulary is common. 80-90% of the vocabulary is common, but it is difficult because they are so similar. In fact, in some ways, it's difficult. It's difficult to leave. So you struggle to get yourself into a sort of a Spanish mood, Spanish meaning the language. Now you've got to do that. You almost have to sort of disengage from the Spanish to throw yourself into Portuguese or into French. And so that is a little difficult, but you have the advantage that the vocabulary is so similar. So you just keep plodding along, and there will be many, not just one, many aha moments.
Yep. Yeah. And I think one of the things that makes LingQ great is that in between those aha moments, we can kind of get discouraged. But when you look at your stats on LingQ, it becomes very clear, like I am improving, I'm putting in the work, I'm doing the activity, I'm learning words. So in between those aha moments, you have that kind of line to get you there.
I think they do language learners a great disservice at school, where they basically grade them based on output, grade them based on their performance in the language. At LingQ, most of our statistics evaluate you based on your level of activity. If you are active in the language, listening, reading, speaking, writing, whatever you're doing, if you're active in the language, you are improving. Now, some people may improve more than others. And at school, as we know, some kids do better than other kids. But what should be measured is the level of activity. And if you remain active in your language learning activity, you are improving. There is no way you're not improving. That's what the brain does. It's constantly creating patterns. It's constantly learning. The brain cannot, as again, Manfred Spitzer says, the brain cannot do otherwise than learn. That's what the brain is there for. So keep feeding it stimulus and it will learn.
Awesome. Well, guys, keep feeding your brain with your language. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Steve, and thank you everybody on Zoom and Facebook and YouTube. The December 90-day challenge is going to open up for signups in 2 days, so on Friday. And we should have a Black Friday discount coming out for those who aren't already are already premium users. So look out for emails for that. And thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Good evening.